Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I am chatting with Maddy. Maddy is a nurse and a mum to one little boy. And in today's episode, she's taking us through her whole journey from conception through to her pregnancy and then her postpartum. Maddy jumped into a pregnancy thinking that she would be very informed due to her background as a nurse, but she quickly came to the conclusion that there was a lot of things she didn't know, and she also had the mindset of saying, I just want a healthy baby and I'll be fine regardless, which now reflecting on it, Maddy realizes that indeed her own experience and her own birthing experience is as important as the health of a baby. During her pregnancy and labor for her son, Maddy says that she was very easygoing and was happy to go along with the options offered to her. In this episode, we chat about Maddy's experience of having a close relative losing her baby at term and how this affected Maddy's pregnancy and led her to choose to have an induction after her due date. Maddy was also very open about her mental health journey, both throughout her pregnancy with the anxiety she experienced and how she was dismissed by her GP and psychiatrist, and she wasn't getting the help that she needed, so she had to find strategies to help her navigate her anxiety, but also the difficult postpartum period that she experienced, and which started with a very unwell 3-day-old newborn that she had to take to the emergency department, and her son was subsequently diagnosed with having seizures and went on to stay in the NICU for 2 weeks, which affected Maddy physically because she was at that time recovering from a C-section, also mentally, and also affected her breastfeeding journey. So Maddy takes us through what this looked like for her, and she also opens up about a very important topic that I believe is not spoken about enough, which is the topic of having postpartum rage, and what it effectively looked like for Maddy and what she's currently doing to try and manage the emotions that she's experiencing. Once again, thank you so much, Maddy, for being so raw and open with us on this podcast. And I will now leave you with the episode. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. You are listening to Kappa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. Hi, Maddy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, that's all right.
Do you want to start by introducing yourself? So telling the listeners, well, your name that I've already introduced, where you're living and who is in your family.
Yeah, so I'm Madeline. I get called Maddy most of the time. We're in southeastern Victoria, well, Melbourne, in the city of Casey. And then we just have me and my husband and then our little boy. He's 9 months old, named Sullivan.
Oh, so cute. 9 months is such a cute age, isn't it? It's just that starting to make sense of the world, wanting to get a bit of independence maybe, testing boundaries a little bit maybe. No.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Not even slightly, like full on. He's fully crawling. He's fully walking with furniture.
Wow.
I put up boundaries so he can't get into the kitchen and he just like climbs around them. And then once he's in the kitchen, he just pulls all his bottles out of his little bottle basket.
Oh.
In the last week, he said dada for the first time. So
nice. That's so exciting. Cheeky. Does he say mama or mum?
It's good in the morning when he wakes up. No, not yet, which is sad. But also in the morning when he wakes up, especially now that he's been waking up at 6:15, his first thing he does is he sits up and he goes, dad, 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 dad. And I go, oh, he wants you. Doesn't work, but on the weekends, maybe it will work.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, he's obviously asking for his dad. His dad needs to get up and get him up and get him breakfast and so on. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, good, Dada.
Yep, so keep saying Dada.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Madeline? Do you prefer Madeline or do you prefer Maddie? Which one?
Maddie's fun.
Okay.
It's what I get the most.
Okay. Yeah. People are a bit lazy and shorten your name. Okay, perfect.
My parents call me Maddie because I think we're a family we like longer names with nicknames intentionally.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I think of names for babies, I think of names that I like the nickname of.
Yeah.
And for instance, my husband likes a particular name for if we had another son.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but there's no good nicknames. I can't do it. I can't get behind it. So we're all, I don't think I've ever seriously called my sister by her actual full name in her lifetime. And if I did, she would give me daggers because it's just not her name. Like it's her name on paper, but it's just not her name. I like Madeline and I like Maddie, so I don't mind.
Yeah.
But we're a nicknamey.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Hence Sullivan,
Until
Sully.
it got to my brother. Then he got a name that you couldn't really shorten.
Oh, Maddie, did you always want to be a mum?
Yes. Since I was 8 years old. And at that point I wanted 5 kids and it has reduced since then.
Okay. What number are you on now?
Because 5 is just no. 3.
3 is good, yeah.
But I don't know. My husband says if we had a girl as our second, he would be less inclined to go for a third.
Oh, does he think
really
girls are a bit more difficult?
I think he does think they would be more difficult, just based on his experience in his family.
Okay.
But he's always wanted a son and he's always wanted a daughter, and he doesn't. I don't think he feels the need to have 2 sons or 2 daughters if he's already got one of each.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you had, I always wanted daughters. I was a bit biased. I always wanted daughters. And when I found out I was pregnant, I decided that I was sure it was a boy. Okay. So to avoid any disappointment, before I found out the gender, I hyped myself up on all these, if you have a boy, you can do these things, and you can do these things, and imagine this, and it'll be fantastic. And I hyped myself up so much that I got to the point where I was like, what would I even do with a girl? And then of course it was a boy. And by then I was fully happy with it. I was like, yep, no disappointment. Hyped myself up because I was sure it was a boy. And then I could avoid because ever since I was 8, I was like, I want to have girls. I don't want boys, but I have a little brother. So I think he's the reason I didn't want boys. But then, hype myself up. And although my son does resemble my brother a lot. Okay. But that's not a problem. My brother was a very cute baby, so it's fine.
That's funny because
he's less cute now, but he's 15, so.
That's funny because I feel like most moms, they want to have a daughter because it's like mini-me, you just imagine all the ways that your daughter's going to be the same as you, but then obviously they're a different human being. Sometimes they don't end up being like you at all, or they don't end up being like your partner at all. But in the end, as you said, it doesn't matter because you can do, some girls, as they grow up to be toddler and children, they end up being a bit more boyish, let's say, liking boy stuff, so to speak. Yeah. And then, some boys end up liking more girlish stuff, if that's even a thing. I mean, does it matter? Not really, I guess.
I was just, it's like, no, it doesn't matter. I don't mind. And then, he was a boy because we felt it from the start, which was actually good in the end because we had no girls' names that we could agree on. And we had Sully's name before I even knew I was pregnant. Oh. We had literally had a conversation. I would have been pregnant, but we didn't know yet. Yeah. And we had a conversation and we went through names because as soon as we conceived, I was like, I think I'm pregnant. And so I was looking up baby names, looking up baby items, doing all that stuff. And so we had a name before we even did a test. So that was easy because I was like, oh, at least if it's a boy, we have his name already.
Wow.
But we could not think. We even kept trying to think of girls' names throughout the whole pregnancy, even knowing he was a boy. We were like, still like, do you like this girl's name? Do you like this girl's name? Still, by the whole 40 weeks, we had no girls' names we could agree on. So,
wow.
thank goodness he was a boy.
Well,
or he would still have no name. We'd be like, yes, this is our daughter. Oh, what's her name? Well, I don't know.
Well, I hope if you have a daughter, you know, for the next one, that you maybe find a name, you know, by chance, like early on or, you know, at some point in your pregnancy, and you go,
we've already been thinking of names this whole time.
Wow. For 9 months.
Yeah,
wow.
ever since we like had him, we've still been going, do you like this girl's name? For like the last 18 months, we've been thinking of girls' names. We still have none we have settled on.
Wow. That's interesting.
So I think we're destined to have boys.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
we just have to have more boys.
Plus, you've got another boy's name anyway. So I mean, you know, you might manifest another boy, basically. Right?
Yeah, I hope not, because if we have another boy, my husband will want that boy's name, and I'm just not keen on it.
Oh, that's right.
Well, no good ones. No ones I want to call my son.
So you had planned to conceive Sully when you did, right?
No. He was not planned.
Oh,
so
right. Was he? He
wasn't really planned. He was planned eventually.
Yeah.
We had a 5-year plan, which was shortened.
Wow.
To 2 years. It was just mistiming. A very happy mistake. But in saying that, every time I would ovulate, every single month, I would say to my husband, "Can we have a baby?"
Yeah.
And every time he would say, "No." It was like, not yet, like eventually, but he would say, not right now. And that's how eventually I realized that I was ovulating, because every time it would be like a week after my period would end, and then I'd get really clucky and I'd be like, oh, babies, they're so cute. Can we have one? And he'd be like, no. And then that was just mistimed. And then as soon as I was clucky, and I was like, oh, I think I'm pregnant. Got my little app out and looked at my ovulating, like when I would be.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, maybe. I was like, but then my cluckiness just didn't go away, because usually when I'm ovulating, I'm clucky. And then as soon as it goes away, I'm like, oh, I don't want a baby. It's impractical. We're not ready yet. And then that time it just didn't go away, which told me, oh, yeah. Yep. Wow. And I was like, okay, I think I'm pregnant. Starts Googling names, starts Googling baby clothes, like figure out when the baby would be due if I was pregnant based on my period, like all of that stuff. And my husband's like, you're going to get your hopes up and it's not going to happen. He's like, we haven't accidentally conceived on our first try of, well, not try, because we didn't try, but like, he's like, it's just very unlikely. Don't get your hopes up. I'm like, oh, but I feel like I am. He's like, but I just don't want you to be disappointed when your period comes. And I'm like, okay. So I tried not to Google stuff, but when he was not at home, I just Googled stuff anyway. Yeah. And then I tested the day my period was meant to come. And then, it was like full on bright positive.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, I knew it.
Look at you. You just knew it. And your husband was in either total disbelief or he just didn't want to hear it. How did he react then?
He was shocked, funnily enough, even though for 2 weeks I had been telling him. He was, very surprised. He was fine with, it was just initial surprise, because he really didn't expect it, because he was like, there's no way. I just don't think he understood, because obviously he's not a girl, so he doesn't understand, I think, like, the hormones, and in the way my body was working, it was just so obvious to me, but he didn't feel that. So I think when I'm saying, no, I'm pregnant, and he's saying, no, you can't be, and you couldn't know that. He's saying, like, you couldn't know that. And I was like, no, but I'm pretty in tune with my body. And I'm pretty sure. And so he didn't even feel like my warning had warned him, because he was shocked, like full on shocked. He had to take like the next day off of work, because he was like in this state of shock. And I was like, okay. I was like, how about you stay home? We'll like discuss it all. So we had like a nice day of him realizing. But then as soon as he kind of was not shocked anymore, he was like super excited.
Oh,
because
nice.
obviously it was just our plan brought forward a couple of years, which wasn't a big deal. So then he reacted fine after the initial surprise.
So what was your plan? Did you want to do like traveling and just enjoy being a couple for a bit longer and maybe buy a house, get married? Was that what the plan was, and then eventually have the baby?
No, so we were already married.
Mm-hmm.
We were married May 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and then we
Yeah.
found out December 2021.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But our 5-year plan was just be married for 5 years. That was like, we didn't have any big goals. We didn't have like massive goals of buying a house or traveling the world or anything. Like we still travel.
Yeah.
We traveled when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And
nice.
we traveled just now with my son. So we haven't to us, we're planning to go to America next year. So
cool.
him, Sully being here has not affected any travel plans.
Yeah.
Except obviously factoring in a baby into travel. But no, we just wanted I think we just wanted a few years to ourselves, just us as a couple.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
it's all right. We still, even when we found out we were pregnant, obviously we had another 9 months as just a couple. So
yeah, of course,
we made the most of that.
Oh, that's amazing! Wow. So, how much did you know? So you basically you're pregnant pretty much as soon as you conceive, and you start googling names and that. How much did you know about your birthing options and what was available around where you lived?
Not a lot, but a little bit. Yeah. I have worked, because I do casual nursing, I had worked in Frankston Hospital before, and nothing against Frankston Hospital. I just was like, I'd heard good things about Monash, so I had asked my GP, because as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I just booked a GP appointment.
Yeah, makes sense.
And when we booked that, she did the test, like the blood test, and she's like, yeah, it looks positive. We waited for confirmation before we would tell anyone, because we were like, maybe the test is wrong. We'll just get a blood test. Once it's confirmed, then we can feel like we can tell people if we choose to. So we got the blood test, and then once that was confirmed, I asked, because we're kind of in the middle of Frankston and Casey, Monash. I asked for Monash. Because I'd never worked at Monash, and I had never been to Monash, but I had worked at Frankston, and I don't know. I just wanted to go to Monash. I have no idea.
Sounds good.
So, but then they referred me to Monash, so that was pretty good, pretty quick. I guess I thought I'd be pretty all right going into everything, even though I didn't know a lot of stuff, because I was like, I'm a nurse. I know about medical stuff. Yeah. But all I know, being a nurse, all I knew was about medical stuff. So it didn't really help me.
Well, you know about the things that go, I guess, wrong. You know about diseases and that. But, I mean, a pregnancy is not a disease, so.
Yeah, I know about medical stuff, treatment and stuff. Yeah, exactly. Probably didn't do as much research into it all as I could have. I think I knew enough about induction and stuff in case I needed one of those. And my mum had 3 cesareans, so I knew about them, and I wasn't really scared of that, because I was like, oh, yeah, that's a totally fine, safe way to give birth if it comes to that. I was very, probably too relaxed about it all, because I had preferred if I could have had spontaneous, natural-ish. I wanted a spontaneous vaginal delivery. I wasn't worried. I was like, I'm happy to have meds. I'm happy to have an induction if I needed that. And I was happy to have a cesarean if I needed that. But I didn't do a lot of research into how to support any of those things. I was just saying, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, I see. And I think that's common amongst first-time mums. Being pregnant it's just so overwhelming when it's your first pregnancy. And because you don't have children yet, you've got so much time to prepare for it. But at the same time, usually you're working, so you're kind of busy as well. And you just don't know what you don't know, right? So you're kind of I feel like we should be more guided by the medical system, especially as first-time moms, but it just doesn't seem to be the case. So unless you actually specifically ask for things, they don't happen, or that's not the way it goes, which is a bit sad actually. At Monash, did you get into midwifery group practice, or did you have your own midwife, or did you just see whoever was on call back then?
When Sully would have been just 6 weeks gestation, I had like a bit of cramping and like a very slight bit of bleeding. So I went into the emergency and had like an ultrasound and had a subchorionic hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
Very small, but I think that with that being classed as like bleeding in the pregnancy, and I have a heart-shaped uterus, apparently.
Oh, have you?
And then those two things crossed with apparently my mum having had preeclampsia with her first pregnancy makes me slightly higher risk for it.
Oh,
so with those three factors, I think that they wanted me to see the obstetrician, but I don't know because they didn't really explain it. But I don't think I was considered low risk, even though I was probably low risk.
Did you have to have extra
so with
scans?
with the heart-shaped uterus, they then they scheduled me growth scans for 28, 32 and 36 weeks because they were worried about restricted growth. So we had those scans because, I mean, at the time, I guess I was just so excited to see him. I was like, cool, 3 extra scans and they're covered by Medicare. Absolutely. I want to see my son extra times. And it was just reassurance. So I was like, extra reassurance. I know he's growing. I know he's doing well. To me, it was a no-brainer at the time. So that was good. And then those scans showed he was not growth restricted. In fact, he had so much room that he was shown to be in the 99th percentile in all his measurements.
Wow.
Basically the
whole time. That is amazing. Go Sully.
Yeah, so it was huge. At the time, I was like, because they were saying, at the first ultrasound, 28 weeks, they were like, okay, so he's showing pretty big, but it's not always accurate. So at this stage, we're not really concerned. Then at 32 weeks, and it was all consistent, and they were still like, yeah, ultrasound's pretty inaccurate. We're not concerned, really. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure it's accurate because just the consistency. And then 36 weeks, 100%, he was like, they were calling him above the 99th percentile. They were like, so you can't really get the 100th percentile, but like he's above the 99th. And I was like, okay. And then still at the appointments, which was, I mean, knowing what I know now, I'm very impressed with them. At the appointment after that one, 36 weeks, and they're like, you know what? Ultrasounds are not very accurate, especially later into pregnancy. They're like, so we're not really concerned and we don't think you need to do anything about it. Good. And I was like, that is a good thing. Amazing. And at the time, all my family was like, he's pretty big. Are they going to try and like get him out early? And I was like, apparently they're not concerned. Apparently, that's not a reason for them to induce him. Yeah. Apparently, they're not concerned. It's not very accurate, which was amazing things because obviously that's the stuff that I know now is 100% like accurate. And now I know that, a big baby's not a reason to induce and all that. But at the time I was thinking, oh, okay, I would have thought you'd induce. But they were like, no. And I was like, fantastic. Like looking back, I'm so grateful that they weren't at 36 or 37 weeks going, he needs to come out.
No, that's good. That's really interesting. And then sorry, I just wanted to say, coming back to your scans, having extra scans, I know, nowadays there's a bit of, mistrust of the medical community and, what those tests, how accurate they can be, and therefore the consequences they might have, when they say, oh, you have a big baby, therefore we need to induce you. But the thing is, if it helps you, if those scans, and as you said, for you, it was confidence that Sully was growing. So you could visually see the growth that Sully was having 4 weeks at a time. And I think if, as a mom, if it helps you, then go for it, And then if the medical community, starts, as you said, pushing for an induction for no other reason other than it's a big baby, which is not a reason for induction, then that's when you can say, no, we're not doing that, because you have a right to say no, because it's your body, your baby, your decision. You can actually say no to a medical professional. That is fine. Very interesting that they just went, he'll just continue to grow and everyone's happy about it.
Yeah.
Good. Perfect.
They were not worried at all about his size. Except
Good.
they were a few times they were like, he's a bit cheeky. He doesn't want to give you a good picture. And they're like, he's hiding his face behind his hand and he's hiding it. That's the only anytime we had a scan, that's the only concern they had. And I was like, that's pretty good if that's the only concern they want to have. I know looking back, I'm like really surprised that they just were totally happy with it. And it was particularly one obstetrician, and because I was just public, so I just saw any obstetrician who was working. So I don't remember her name, but one particular obstetrician, I think I had even said to her, I was like, he's very big. Like, are you worried about that? And she was like, no. So I think that if she had been a different obstetrician who had said, yes, I'm very worried, I would have been at a position in my own thinking, not realizing, and I would have been a lot more accepting of if they'd said, no, it's really worrying, we need to get him out. So I'm just really grateful that when I asked that question, it was that particular obstetrician, because I would have just thought that there was something wrong if they had said that, because I didn't know any different.
How much education did you do in your pregnancy? Did you do maybe the birth class at the hospital, or did you do any independent courses, podcast listening, research, all of that?
At the time, honestly, not enough. I don't think they didn't do in-person education still at that point. Not through the hospital. And then I didn't look into, I looked into a few in-person ones, but I just didn't go to any. I didn't book with any. They had an online one through the hospital, and I started watching it for maybe 5 minutes. But I was honestly, I think I just had this in my mind that I was like fine, and that I would be fine without it. I don't know, because it was silly. Now I look back, I go, man, I really should have done more. Yeah, I just didn't. I don't think I did any.
Well, that's all right.
I started reading a book. I didn't even finish that book. So
that's all right.
Yeah.
Well, you can't force yourself.
I think all of the research I did and the education I did and all the knowledge I have now was done afterwards.
But see, that's all right, because if you're not in the headspace, of seeking information and wanting it, then really. Sometimes having it thrown at you is more anxious.
Yeah, that's the thing is I think that I just didn't want to. I don't know why I didn't. I think I thought I was just so happy with whatever happened. I think that at the end of the day, I had a relative, a pretty close relative about 8 years ago. She had a full-term stillbirth. And so to me, all I cared about was a baby that was alive, basically, because even like my mum had 3 cesareans. So I was like, I'm not scared if that happens, because she had 3 cesareans, but she had 3 live births. So to me, I was like, whatever happens, as long as he comes out alive and stays that way. Oh, that's right. I think I was not too worried about any other outcomes. At the time, I didn't really have the mentality of a happy, healthy baby and mum. I was just like a happy, healthy baby and I'll be fine. I'll get over anything else. Obviously I wanted a live mum, a live baby. But then I didn't add the happy and healthy mum either. I just went a live, happy, healthy baby, a mum that doesn't die. It's all good with me.
Yeah, and as you said, you had that experience. Were you extra maybe anxious during your pregnancy? I guess maybe that subsided by feeling Sully move, into the second and then the third trimester maybe?
Definitely. I think it played a part all throughout the whole pregnancy. Like at the start, especially with that subchorionic hemorrhage, he would have only been about 6 weeks at the time. And we were out camping out in Gippsland. It was the middle of the night and I had just had a shower and realised I had a bit of cramping all night, and I had a tiny bit of bleeding, and it was so small, but I was just beside myself. And I just got us up in the middle of the night, and we had our dog out camping with us, and we were camping with some family, and we just, I guess, knocked on someone's tent and said, can you watch our dog? We're going to drive to the hospital. And luckily, I guess it came into play there too, is we were so aware of loss that we had told our really close family members about our pregnancy at like 4 weeks or something.
Yeah.
It was essentially within a week of finding out we were pregnant. We told all our immediate family, because I said to my husband, I said, if we have a loss, I don't want to be saying, hey, I was pregnant.
Yeah.
I've had a loss and now I need support. I said to him, I want to be saying, you know how I was pregnant. I've had a loss.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to, I guess I didn't want to say to anyone, I was pregnant and I've lost it. I'd prefer for them to have known I was pregnant, just from a support aspect. So I said I wanted them to know immediately, which is interesting because I know a lot of people say they don't want to tell anyone until the second trimester in case they have a loss. But for me, I was like, no, I need to tell them now in case I have a loss. So when we did have that bit of bleeding, the person we were camping with was my brother and sister-in-law. So we just knocked on their tent and said, can you have our dog? And we drove to the nearest hospital, which would have been Hayfield or something, which was closed. It wasn't even a proper hospital. So we had to drive to Traralgon, which was maybe an hour in total. And the whole time I was like, oh, I'm really worried. But then they had that was the first ultrasound. And again, upon reflection, I'm like really glad that at that ultrasound he was developed enough to have had a heartbeat, because sometimes they don't detect a heartbeat at 6 weeks.
That's right.
And they detected a heartbeat. It was going really strong, really happy and healthy. And then a few weeks later, I was like, oh, heaps of people don't even see a heartbeat that early. I'm like, I'm so glad that he had one already, because that would have terrified me if he wasn't developed enough to have had a heartbeat at that point. But then he was he was healthy. The hemorrhage was gone by 12 weeks-ish, because we had a lot of scans. I don't think we needed all the scans we ended up having, but we had a lot of scans showing really good development all the way through. I had morning sickness, which again, that went away when we went to the camping site. So all of a sudden I had no morning sickness, which I had had really strongly for the 2 weeks leading up to it. Morning sickness completely went away. And then that cramping and that bleeding, I was just mortified. But it just turned out the country air was really good for my morning sickness, because every time I went into the country, my morning sickness went away. And then every time we came back, as soon as we reached Pakenham, I was just like throwing up again. By the third trimester, everything had gone pretty well. But then as we were nearing full term, that's when like the anxiety was coming back, because my cousin went past her due date. And so as we got to my due date, I was like really stressed out, and I was just like really worried. And I was like, also because he was so big, I was kind of like preparing myself. I was like, he might come early. I was like, maybe he'll come early. Like he's measuring 3 weeks ahead. I'm like, I'm really small. I'm 160 centimeters, and pre-pregnancy I was 52 kilos. So I'm very small. And I was like, fitting in this giant baby, I'm like, I don't have a lot of space. Maybe he'll come early. I guess that was just me being hopeful. And then as we reached my due date, I was just getting really stressed out. And a few times I had reduced movements, just like scattered around, I think 32 weeks-ish. I had some, but that was like, he was all fine. As we got closer to my due date, I was having more in a shorter period of time. So I was freaking out a bit. A lot. Right. But I was not worried. I knew as soon as any reduced movements, I would go into hospital. So I think overall I might have gone in 3 or 4 times for reduced movements over the whole pregnancy though, but a lot towards the end.
Right.
And that was very stressful. I was not relaxed at all. And everything I read is like, try and relax as you get to due date. It brings on the oxytocin. And I was like stressed as I was like, there was no way he was like gonna come out with how stressed I was. He probably thought there was like a lion about to pounce on me. He was like, I'm staying in here. Thank you.
It's hard to stay relaxed, and especially, with your experience, it's even harder. And saying be relaxed is not going to help you to relax at all. Like, just saying it doesn't mean you're going to feel relaxed all of a sudden. But and this due date, it's terrible, because it gives you so much anxiety. If you go past a certain day, in your pregnancy, then you go, oh my goodness, I'm overdue. I hate that term, by the way. I need to be induced now. This baby needs to come out right now, when we know that it's probably safe to go until like 42 weeks, but somehow at 40 there's a cut off and everyone starts freaking out. I don't know.
Interestingly enough, they had never ever mentioned any thing. They had never mentioned intervening at all.
Interesting.
At any of my prenatal visits, they never mentioned it. Even as we neared my due date, it was not brought up at all. And I think that, to me, I was like stressed out, and as I reached my due date, I was stressed. They did not put any of the stress onto me. I was stressed, but that was based off my cousin's past due date loss. And even though going past my due date it was not a problem. Going past my due date was not a problem. And they didn't say it was a problem, and they never brought up it being a problem. Yeah. And I was stressed out completely, entirely me. Like, I was freaking out. And at one point, like one night, I had a headache, and I was really stressed out, and I was just like a mess, and I was just not coping. And I was like, I just want him to come out already, because I'm like, I know he's fine right now. And I was like, but I couldn't handle it. And it was interesting because I had, and you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear this after everything I've been saying, I had like prenatal anxiety, and I was seeing an antenatal psychiatrist for it through my pregnancy, and that was really had the potential to be really helpful. But I brought up the anxiety I had around my experience with my cousin, and they went and basically disregarded it and they didn't even say maybe go to a person and debrief about it, because although it's not my birth, it probably have been really helpful to have debriefed with a professional. They just kind of disregarded it and went, no, we're doing an OCD screening. It's like, I'm not OCD. I'm not OCD. Wow. They discovered after the screening. But so all this anxiety I had to deal with kind of myself. I figured out that coffee did not help at all. Coffee was really bad. I actually cut out coffee when I figured it out, and my anxiety decreased significantly. But I didn't need the psychiatrist for that. So realistically, it could have been a really helpful, but I think they were a bit too focused on the OCD screening and not focused enough on the things that were causing me anxiety.
Yeah, that sounds. It sounds like you found
But they were
covered.
They were a hospital psychiatrist covered by Medicare, so I would have been more annoyed if I had paid for them out of pocket.
Yeah.
I figured it out that coffee was a big thing, and so that helped probably cut back 50%. It cut back basically the anxiety that was caused by random day-to-day things, but it didn't cut back on the anxiety caused by my fear of stillbirth, and they didn't really help. When I saw the psychiatrist, they didn't help, but they said they would see me after delivery to see how I was going with all the anxiety. I'm 9 months postpartum, and I have not heard from them at all.
Really? That is poor servicing of someone, of a mum who is telling you she has anxiety, and we know that the patient gives you the diagnosis if you actually listen, and then she said she would see you postnatally and she just hasn't. That's the system there. That's the system for getting women that need help like you. That is just not good enough.
Yeah, definitely. I've even been to my GP since I've had my baby, because I've had I don't know, I never knew it was a thing until after I had my baby and was researching, and I thought I might have had postpartum anxiety, but I think it's just been postpartum rage, which I went to my GP for, and they were like, yeah, that's not a thing, we can't diagnose that. I'm like, mate, it is a thing.
It is a thing. Yeah,
it's a real thing. Essentially, she said everyone gets stressed out sometimes, and we take it out on our loved ones, and that's because they're the closest people to us. And she said you just got to cope with that. And I was like,
that's
not no, it's enough. A thing. It's not a thing I've had until postpartum. I'm pretty sure it's a thing. I've read about it.
Yeah,
and
it is a thing.
I've got it, but I again cut out coffee. It has helped significantly. So I just don't drink caffeine anymore. I have had to cut that out, which is really, really rough, because I'm a nurse, I love coffee.
Yeah. And you live in Melbourne. It's a bit of a shame to not drink coffee.
All my life. Oh, exactly. But all my, I used to hate coffee. When I was a teenager, I hated it. But I really wanted to like it. I don't know why. I really just wanted to like it. So I used to drink it, and I would put 5 sugars in it. And then I cut back to no sugars eventually, slowly, so I could like coffee. Love coffee now. And now it's like I've figured out that works for me. Apparently I'm self-diagnosing, self-treating myself, and I figured out caffeine is just a no-go. So I drink decaf, which I always thought was pointless. And I used to be like, why do people bother? Now I get it.
Yeah, exactly. But coming back to
Decaf
postpartum rage.
I like the taste now.
Coming back to postpartum rage, I've only heard of it recently, actually, so I don't know if maybe, like, it's obviously not new, but I think it wasn't spoken about, more to the point.
Yeah.
And I think medical professionals, like, obviously not all GPs are the same, and I say that every single podcast I can, but if your health professional is saying things that are dismissive, or, you know, where you feel like you're not being heard, then they're obviously not right for you. And, you know, being told, you know, by the psychiatrist, oh, yeah, anyway, you know, your cousin's had a stillbirth at 40 weeks. I'm just going to do OCD screen. And then your GP being like, oh no, that's normal, you just get stressed. That's not good enough. Like, you're obviously trying your best to open up, to say, this is my situation, could you please help me? Could you please give me strategies so I can manage it the best I can, so I can be the best mom I can? And you're being dismissed. That is just not acceptable. And if anyone else is listening and is in the same boat, please change your health professional. And I know that's not easy sometimes, but there are health professionals out there that are listening and that will help. But sometimes you have to try a few before you find that person. And that's really sad.
Yeah, and I was like surprised because in the past, I had a few health issues that I wanted to investigate, and she was really great. Like, she booked me, you know, appointments with specialists. She got me like ultrasounds if I needed that. Like, she was fantastic. With everything else, I think that, that might just not be her specialty.
That's right.
The postpartum mental health. But I think it's very recent. So it's like even postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, they're obviously more well known, but they're even a recent thing that people didn't used to recognize. So the rage one, I think they're still coming in to get to know that one too. So I've also heard on a podcast, because I found a podcast that spoke of postpartum rage. They also said that sometimes cutting out gluten can help. And so much so that sometimes, you know, people will accidentally eat some gluten, not realizing it's gluten, and they'll feel the feelings almost immediately that they know it's gluten. And so I'm already cut out coffee, and I've got to psych myself out for trying the gluten thing. I love gluten. That's a big step. And it will be very sad. But I will try it if I feel that I will try it if I feel I need to, if it comes to that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
At this point, I think coffee's been, just cutting out that has been really good. But I breastfeed, so I think that I'm kind of doing like a study on myself. I wonder if when I stop breastfeeding eventually, if it will go with that, because obviously I haven't menstruated since birth, and I am breastfeeding, so my hormones aren't what they once were. So I wonder, and I will be monitoring myself to know if it goes away and if I can resume coffee when I return to normal. I said to my husband, though, I said, because we're obviously planning a second at some point, I said, we probably need to have it sooner rather than later, because I said, you know, my anxiety and stuff started when I was pregnant, and then it's continued through breastfeeding. So I said, so imagine if I am just finishing breastfeeding my son, because we want to aim for about 2 years, when he's 2 years old, try for the second. So I said, imagine that's when I'm probably approximately finishing breastfeeding my son. I said, so just when I would be going back to normal, I'm going to be pregnant again. Have all that anxiety again, and then 9 months later have the baby, and then breastfeed. Hopefully I'll be able to breastfeed again as long as I can. And I'm like, this could end up going on for 5 years, especially if then we went for third. I might have anxiety and rage for 7 years. I said, we just gotta churn them out so I can stop breastfeeding in a sooner time, because I'm like, I don't know, obviously this is all just, there's not a lot out there that I've been able to find on it, so I'm kind of just experimenting on myself. Like, I'm a medical professional, I can do my own study on myself.
I know what I'm doing. Yeah, exactly. As you said, it's just
Yeah,
so
no one else
new,
is
and
going
it's
to do
not.
it. Do it for
Yeah,
myself.
that's right. It's just not spoken about, that there is not a lot of info. And you sharing that caffeine is really helping you is probably going to be really useful for someone else out there who's listening and experiencing the same thing and going, oh, I can
Yeah.
try and cut out coffee. Okay, well, let's try
Yeah.
that. Are you seeing anyone, like any
Yeah.
psychologists or psychiatrists now postnatally?
No. So, yeah,
Mm.
when they said they'd see me when my baby was born, we never saw them. Then I went to the GP kind of expecting them to do a referral or something.
Yeah.
I discovered the tool online, and right now it's just not coming to me. It's not Cope. It's the other one for like a Panda.
Panda.
They have a tool that you can go through and answer the questions, and then they tell you, they tell you what they think you may have. Obviously, they don't diagnose you, but they say, look, go see a professional because it sounds like this. They had said it had sounded like postpartum anxiety. So I was like, okay, I'll go to the GP. Upon further research, I had thought maybe could be postpartum anxiety, or it sounded more to me like postpartum rage. And then they asked me questions at the GP. They were like, well, it doesn't sound like postpartum depression or anxiety. They're like, you're very, you're coping really well and all that stuff from a functional point of view. They're like, you're functioning, you're still excited to go outside, you still hang out with all your friends all the time. They're like, you actually seem to be adjusting really well. It's not diagnosable because it's none of these things. So we can't refer you under Medicare. And I was just like, at that point, I was like, I'll just try a few things. At this point, I'm trying a few things for myself before I go fork out money for a private psychiatrist or psychologist, especially after my experience with the psychiatrist during pregnancy wasn't
that's right.
the greatest, which is a shame because I'm kind of like, well, will they be useful? Because at least when they weren't useful, it was covered by Medicare. Yeah, so I'm just trying a few things for myself at the moment, but I definitely have access to another GP. At the clinic I go to, there's 2 GPs I've been seeing over the time. Like over the last few years, I've gone to 2 GPs. So if I feel, I'll go to the other GP and see if she's more.
That's probably a good
up-to-date.
option too. It's really sad. It sounds like for you to get, bulk billed Medicare, psychologist, psychiatrist services, you need to be rock bottom, basically, which you're not, which is great. Like, it is really good. But it sounds like, you could still maybe use the help of mental health help to, give you some strategies. But according to Medicare, you just don't fit the criteria of being totally just broken, basically. So you just can't get it publicly funded. That is just really sad. Shouldn't be that way, but I mean, it kind of is. Organizations like Panda, like you mentioned, are actually really good because they've got a helpline, which is really good to call and just chat to someone, even if, you're feeling good, but you just want to get maybe some pointers to go, well, I'm feeling this, I think it is that. Like, if you want to get, I guess, reassurance and just know what to do with the feelings you have, you don't have to be completely rock bottom to seek help. You can seek help early and say, this is what I'm feeling. I'm not even sure if this is normal because, first postpartum, how would you know? And just also sometimes talking to someone who's been trained, like, those people at Panda, is really good because it just makes you feel validated, which is super important in motherhood. Sometimes we just need someone to acknowledge that, yes, you might have that, or yes, you're doing excellent, just so we can feel better. Sometimes we just need validation, and that's how it is.
Luckily, I'm very open with people I talk to. I have a friend, she recently got married. I don't think she's planning kids, but I was telling her and her husband about postpartum rage. I was like, I didn't know it was a thing, but I have it. And they were like, what? That's a thing? They're like, postpartum rage, what happens? I was like, I just get really angry. And they're like, oh my goodness. They're like, I've never heard of that. And they're like, I didn't even know that was a thing. But now, maybe if they do eventually have kids, at least they'll know it's a thing. But I talked to my husband about it, and my sister, and basically anyone who asks. I'm very open. maybe they don't want
Yeah.
me to be as open as I am, but I am.
No, but see,
I
that's
benefit
good.
from it, so they can just deal with it.
Yeah, but that's how the word gets spread. It's by people like you saying, "This is what I have. This is how I feel. This is how it manifests." And then, I mean, you don't have the solution. No one has it, because I don't think it's a one size fits all solution. For you, caffeine seems to help, but I think spreading the word, because just like you said, I've only heard of it probably maybe 3 months back is the first time I've heard of it. I thought I was living under a rock, because I thought, how did I not know that? I mean, I'm super passionate about mental health. I talk about it a lot and I research it, and somehow that never came up in the postpartum period. I was like, oh, I've obviously missed something huge. But I think it has just started to be, the word has just started to be spread out. And it starts with people like you, Maddie. So that's great. That is excellent.
Yeah, I think it's very stigmatized too. I don't
Of
think
course.
that's really something many people want to talk about, because they don't want to be viewed as, they don't want to talk about it because they're worried,
No.
that someone will think they're a bad mum, or that they're
Exactly.
not coping with motherhood or whatever. But
Yeah.
really, you can't get support if you don't ask for it, and if you don't tell people you need it.
Yeah, and see, that's excellent, because I think, there are some terms like, postpartum rage, which should be renamed, because when we think rage, I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I think of someone that's hugely violent and wants to put their fist through the wall or punch someone. And that's not what postpartum rage is, But
Yeah.
it's one of those terms I feel that should be reworded to, I don't know what, but it just, I feel like there's a big stigma. First of all, it's mental health, stigmatized. Second of all, it's almost like if you admit to it, then you're admitting to being a bad mom. And that is not the case at all. You are not a bad mom because you have postpartum rage. You didn't choose to have it to start with. And second, the fact that you recognize it is a sign that you're seeking help, you're wanting to get strategies, get help to, help you to manage the feelings you have, because we know mental health, it's not easy. Being a mom, being a parent is not easy. Sometimes you've got big feelings and you have no idea what to do with them. They have to come out, and sometimes that's how they come out. And that's how you're trying to deal with it as a human. If you're not being helped, how can you do it any different, right? I think the name is not helping to actually talk about it, but it's excellent that you are saying, I have this, and no, I am not a bad mom, and no, I am not violent towards my son, and this is not at all what it is, but you just get really angry and you just don't know what to do with that anger.
Yeah, definitely think, it could be renamed, because rage is a very, very strong word. But
it is.
I guess every word can be pretty strong. So
yeah, true.
Just looking past that and just knowing that the people, if you explain what it is, people get it a lot more than if you just say the name. Bit of education, I think a lot of people just need, and to know it's a thing, know to look out for it, know to look for help if you have it, and hopefully you find a good person to help you with it. But definitely for me, cutting out coffee has been helping.
Let's chat a bit more about your postpartum. So how did you go postpartum? So I know you talked about, postpartum rage, but how did you feel in the early postpartum? How was your mental health, your physical recovery as well after birth, after you birthed your 99th percentile baby?
I guess that plays into part a lot with how his birth actually went. So after all of everything that had like all of my worries and anxiety, all of that, we had reduced movements on a Friday. The next Wednesday we had more reduced movements. So on that Wednesday was 4 days before my due date. That was the first time they mentioned induction, and that was just because of the reduced movements twice in the 1 week. Nothing to do with his size, nothing to do with his actual heart rate. Anytime we got checked for reduced movements, he picked up his movements, his heart rate was going strong, he was fine, but it was just because of the multiple occasions. That was the first time they said, would you want an induction? For me, I was terrified. So I said yes immediately. And then that day they offered a stretch and sweep to hopefully bring on the labor before the actual induction. That was the Wednesday. And then they said we'd had an ultrasound on the Monday. So after the reduced movements on the Friday, they booked us an ultrasound for the Monday just to check on how his fluid and placenta were going. They were going absolutely fantastic. He had so much fluid. And then on the Wednesday, I had the reduced movements again, so I went back into the hospital. That's when they offered the induction for the Sunday. So I said absolutely. Okay, and I was still scared because I was like, that's still 4 days or something. Yeah. They were like, they had more urgent cases because I don't think they were too worried, but they were also happy to offer it. And I was like, that's still 4 days. But they were like, look, and to just be reassuring in the middle of that, just come back on Friday for some monitoring to make sure in between that he's okay. And I was like, good, at least that's something. That was reassuring for me because I was like, I only have to get through a Thursday and then I'm back there Friday. But I was happy. I was like, yes, I've got a date. Like it's an induction. And I was like, I'm going to see him this weekend on Sunday. Woohoo. Fantastic. I was so excited. We went back on the Friday and they weren't happy with his heart rate. I think his heart rate was dropping during a contraction. I don't think it was too bad. And it took a long time for them to come to their recommendation. That they took a while, and then eventually they came in and said, look, they just weren't super happy with how he was going. I don't think he was meeting their criteria. I think their criteria is pretty strict. They want a textbook baby. He wasn't textbook. I was like, I don't care, whatever, just brings him forward a day. Like it wasn't like I was going to have a spontaneous labor and then all of a sudden they were bringing up induction. At that point I was going to be induced on the Sunday. All they wanted to do was bring it to the Saturday. So to me, I was like, yeah, that's fine. Whatever. Cool. Perfect. Whatever. I mean, it wasn't ideal because I hadn't prepared everything. I was like, no, I was relying on that Saturday, but okay. So relying on, bringing my bags in, doing my last few things. I was a bit delayed, but, I was like, whatever. So that night they said, all right, we'll start with the Foley balloon. They did the Foley balloon, worked immediately, within 3 seconds. In fact, she thought she hadn't done it right. This was the midwife that she called the doctor in. The doctor said, no, you've done it right. It's just literally worked immediately. It fell straight out.
Wow.
So she said, we were going to let you go home with the Foley balloon in, but they were like, it's the quickest I've ever seen it work. You're going to have to stay overnight and we'll start the rest of the induction in the morning. I was like, oh, great. Yeah. This is fantastic.
Work, Maddie.
So my husband got to go home and I had to stay in the uncomfortable beds. I didn't sleep. I think maybe I slept 45 minutes. Not a great start. Not ideal. I had 2 showers in the time because it was painful. They had full on. I think they had started a few contractions because I was in pain and I'd had a couple showers to do it. And then I told them, I was like, can I get something just Panadol or something light? They're like, have you tried showers or anything? I was like, yeah, I've had 2 showers. It's like just something light. I didn't want much. They had just mentioned Panadol and stuff like that earlier in the night, and they said try and get as long as you can without it. And I was like, okay, sure, tried, but I was like, but I want to rest, I want to relax just until they bring on the full-on induction parts. So then my mum and my husband met me in at 7-ish. We started the induction. Now, I didn't know a lot about induction because although I'd read their booklet, that's basically the extent of induction education I'd done. So I just did the way they said, all right, so we'll break your waters and start the oxytocin now. I mean, not how I would do it if I was to do it again, but at the time I was like, yep, no, that's fine. That brought on such strong contractions immediately. And I had so much fluid and I think that really, what I know now, I look back and go, that fluid freaked me out. And what I should have done is when they broke my waters, I think I should have sat on the toilet for an hour because it just kept coming out and it freaked me out. Not because it was I just kept losing the waters. And I knew it wasn't dangerous. I knew it wasn't a threat to me or baby. I wasn't worried about it from that point of view. I was just like, there's just so much and I'm uncomfortable. I should have just said no oxytocin for an hour. I want to sit on the toilet till it's out. But no, they started the oxytocin immediately. I was just having such strong contractions. And I kept trying to sit down and lay down on the bed between them. But I had to keep getting up. And I hadn't practiced like positions much, but I figured out pretty quickly that standing on one leg, leaning on my husband with one leg just in the air was apparently really good for me, because it's the only thing that brought the slightest relief. I don't know why. I probably looked like a clown, but it was slightly good, but it was just awful. And then I was not coping at all. The gas didn't work for me. I asked for some morphine, and that took too long. They did it intramuscular, and it just took so long that I just was not coping. And I was like, no, I want an epidural, which I was open to. I was open to all of the pain relief. So to me, I wasn't fighting it back very much. I just wanted to try it all so that I could see what I could cope with and what I needed still. So then by the time the anaesthetist got to me, he was really quick. He was there within like an hour. But by the time he got to me, that morphine had started to kick in. But I was like, no, I'll still get the epidural. I'm not going to send him away now. So I had barely had to I didn't even have to try and relax. I didn't know he was even doing it until he goes, no, I'm already in. I've already given you the epidural. It was super smooth, super easy. Didn't feel it at all. He got my consent and everything like that. It's just that I was sitting forward thinking he was still prepping it. I've been in the operating theatre nursing, and I know exactly the procedure. I've seen it multiple times on other people. Yeah. So I was like just waiting for him, thinking he's prepping it, thinking he's going to tell me to arch forward. And all of a sudden he's like, yeah, it's all done. I'm like, oh, cool. Wow, that was easy.
Oh, wow, well done.
Super easy. And after that, I was just a changed person. I was so happy. They kept telling me, you should relax, save some energy, try and have a nap. I'm talking away. I got to know my midwife. We were having full-on conversations. I know our cats' names.
Oh, good.
And I had a butter chicken. I was very happy. And when I think about my labor, my state of mind when I had that epidural was actually really good. And I think that impacts my view of my labor pretty significantly.
Yeah, definitely.
So then I had the epidural maybe around 12. Yep. Went into active labor, they said around 2. So fully dilated at 7
Wow.
p.m. So that's 12 hours after the induction kind of started. So pretty quick, and they waited maybe an hour or an hour and a half before I was starting to push. But then I was pushing and pushing for 2 hours. I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, about 2 hours. And it was just because I had the epidural, and at the time I didn't know that I could ask to, lower it and try and move around in the bed. I was just on my back. Not ideal. But I needed to have moved for him because he was so big and because he was induced. He wasn't in his optimal position. He just was not going to budge. With the way my labor happened and the way that my birth was happening, he wasn't going to come out that way anyway. So we had a cesarean. Though they did try the vacuum, which is a whole story in itself. They tried the vacuum and it didn't work. And then at that point, it was cesarean. And then when he came out, the first thing the obstetrician said was he was never going to fit. And I like to think back on it and go, no, he was never going to fit in those conditions.
That makes more sense.
I think he would have fit fine in different conditions. But definitely in the induction, with the epidural, he wasn't going to fit. He was massive. The ultrasounds were all 100% accurate. He was 4.7 kilos, 10 pound 6.
Wow.
So
that's insane, Maddie. Wow.
He was giant. So those conditions weren't ideal for him to come out via my vagina. So we had a belly birth, which was fine because I was prepared the whole time. I was like, if I have a cesarean, I'm fine with that. I was fine with that. I wasn't super aware. I think I was pretty, in another mindset when I was consenting, because honestly had morphine, and I had not been in the hospital much through my life, maybe once, and then once for a rash. So I had not had any drugs stronger than ibuprofen in my life. And all of a sudden I'm on the gas, on the morphine with the epidural. And then I swear I'd consented to forceps, but no, it was apparently the vacuum. Although I would love to see my consent form, but I just don't. I just want to leave it in the past, honestly. Because when I found out it was the vacuum, I was like, I swear I said yes to forceps. So that's whatever. But that comes into play again later. So immediately postpartum, he was a very terrible latcher. He didn't really know how to latch, because he was learning, obviously. I was learning. And he was really lazy, and he didn't cry for his food. And so I was still learning too. And so I would ask the midwives, you know, he hasn't eaten for a few hours and he's not crying. Is that okay? And they would say, no, that's fine. You know, he can do that. He'll tell you if he wants the food. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, and then one time it was, I think, 6 hours. And I said, you know, he doesn't want food. And she's like, no, that's okay. Like 6 hours. I can't even go 6 hours without eating. So that was a bit crazy. And then we were only so we had him on the Saturday night, and we were discharged because I really wanted to go home. I was just like, what? Especially because my husband couldn't be in overnight. I was like, I just want to go home where he is, and we're at home where we're comfortable. So we were discharged Monday, and when we were discharged, we had seen that we made sure we saw the lactation consultant in the hospital. We knew how to express colostrum by then. They gave us a few syringes in case we wanted to, so we could top him up if we needed and everything like that. Yep, he'd had all his tests. He was fine. I'd had all mine. I was fine. They said we could go on the Monday, so we went home. That night he didn't really sleep much, but he was still pretty relaxed, and he was just wanted cuddling. He didn't really want to I tried latching him a few times. He just wouldn't latch, so I was, you know, a bit confused. But then we had the maternal child health nurse come out on the Tuesday. She said he'd lost exactly 10% of his birth weight. So he'd lost 470 grams-ish. And then she said, but make sure you're feeding him every 2 hours, because if he drops more, it's a problem. So feed him every 2 hours. And okay, I'm like, finally, you know, at least some instruction on how and when to feed him. So I was doing every 2 hours, but he was such a bad latcher that my nipples were starting to crack. It was so painful. And I was very worried and stressed anytime I would have to feed him. That was probably not helping with the letdown. So even if my milk was transitioning during that time, it was just not going so good. And if it was still colostrum, he just was lazy and probably wanted more food than he was getting. And all through Tuesday, his energies would get lower. And then by Tuesday night, he was falling asleep as soon as I'd put him on the boob. So I'd go to breastfeed him, and he'd have 2 minutes of sucking and he'd fall asleep. And then he did that a couple times in a row, and my mum was there. She was there through the day to help us out, make us some food and do a bit of a tidy for us. It got to around time she would go home to make herself dinner and my dad dinner and stuff, and I just didn't feel comfortable yet. I was like, no, I just want you to stay. And I think it was just something I don't know if it was just I just didn't want her to go, and I don't know what, it was just something telling me not to want her to go. And then that evening we were kind of worried about him because of his feeding, and she kind of said maybe we should take him into the emergency, because he was a little bit jaundiced when he was born, and he was still yellow, and I was very aware that he might be lazy and tired and a bit lethargic if he had jaundice. So we were a bit like, oh, let's just go in case he's not able to eat or tired and stuff because he's jaundiced or anything. Let's get him checked out. You know, he's only 3 days old at this point, and that's especially after he'd already lost his weight. We didn't want a day could make a big difference for him. I didn't want him to get dehydrated and everything. So she was like, you know what, let's go in, which is really good, because me and my mum are definitely more stress heads than my husband. And I think if I'd let her go and I had said it, my husband might have been like, no, he's fine. Because my husband was very optimistic and he's very easygoing. So I think he might not have picked up on it as easy. And I think that having her there to suggest it and to support it was really good. So then what I said was, you know what, it's going to be a big night, because Casey Monash their ED is very busy and they don't have a lot of staff because I think they're very small. So I said, it's going to be a big night. We don't have much sleep to afford us to both have a sleepless night. So I said, could Mum take me into emergency? My husband have a sleep that night, so he's got sleep, so that if we come home the next day, it's fine. He can have the baby while I sleep. So that was what we did. Mum took me into the emergency with my son, and they said, you know, check him in, know his age. Obviously, his birthday was 3 days beforehand. They're like, have a seat. And then we were waiting about 5 minutes, and Mum was just like, we're not waiting in this room with people who could have COVID, colds, RSV. Like, they could have anything. We don't know what these people are in the emergency room for. And it's the one room for everyone. So she goes up and she's like, he's 3 days old. Can we see the nurse, or can we be triaged or whatever? We hadn't even been triaged at that point. And they were like, no, I'll have to talk to the nurse. And Mum sat down, and then she's like, no, this is ridiculous. She went up, I think, to the triage desk, and like, I work in a hospital, and my mum works in a hospital, and she was just like, this doesn't seem right. He's 3 days old. We just got discharged the day before. Surely they'll see him. And then as soon as the nurses knew, they brought us straight through, and they said, 3 days old, no, we want to see him immediately. It was good because she's very upfront. And I'm a bit more like, I don't want to, I don't want to bother them. They're all just doing their job. And I'm like, I get it. And she's like, yeah, they are doing their job, but this time's just not good. We're getting him in now. So it was really good that she was there, because we got taken then through. Eventually we were put in a room, and then we were moved from that room to a different room, and we saw the pediatrician, and she came in and she was talking to me, and she was asking me what I thought was wrong. She said, I don't think anything looks wrong. I think his numbers were fine. Like, when we left, his numbers were fine with the jaundice. She said they asked if I was happy to give him some formula, and I said, yes. I was like, what? Like, if he needs that, if it's going to give him energy, give him formula. Like, me and my siblings were on formula, so again, I was very easygoing with that. I was like, I'm not worried. If he needs formula, that's okay with me. So we gave him some formula, and he just absolutely slurped it up. Like, he finished it so quick, and I was like, maybe it's just my latch, and I was like, maybe I just won't be able to, breastfeed. I didn't know much about breastfeeding, and I could have done with like some education beforehand, but I didn't see a lactation consultant beforehand. I didn't know they were really a thing so much. Like, I'd heard of them, but I thought they were just people you see if you have problems, not people you could see for education beforehand. Which would have been really helpful. But I didn't know much about it. So I was like, maybe I just don't have good supply. My mum didn't have fantastic supply. So I was like, maybe I don't either. So I was like, whatever, formula's fine. So then when this doctor comes in, I thought she was thinking, no, he's fine. He's drank the drink now, but it was just maybe supply, I thought she was going to say. She said, well, just go out and we'll come back soon and see. We'll talk to you soon. I don't know. They just went away. And so I said, so me and Mum said, she doesn't seem to be taking it seriously. Maybe we just came in for nothing. It's not really anything serious. Okay, whatever. Maybe we wasted all this time, but we were just like, at least if we're told he's fine, and at least if we know that he needs formula, we've achieved something. And then at that point, they did a few more tests, I think, and then they came back. The doctor, the pediatrician, and her, maybe intern, but they might have been a higher status than an intern. I'm not really sure. Maybe a registrar. They said a few things, but they said, we just wanted to check with our colleague before we brought anything up in case it wasn't anything serious. They said, but I noticed a few things that indicated like a baby seizure. She said, like, his eyes flickered, his lip tremored, he had a little chin wobble. He was very starey. She said, and it just, they're all things that made me think maybe it was like a subtle seizure. She said, but I didn't want to say anything till I spoke to my colleague. So she said, so I rang him up and woke him up and asked him, and she said, and he agrees. And so they said, so we're going to try and get you a bed at a NICU. We just have to wait for one to come up. They said, we had thought we had recognized you. They said we were actually the pediatrician that was there for his delivery, for the cesarean. And so I was like, oh, wow, okay. That's interesting. Like, I don't remember seeing these people. I remember the anaesthetist, and I even wrote down the anaesthetist's name because he was fantastic, and I wanted to put in a, like, thank you so much, because he kept me calm the whole time. Anytime I had worries, he answered them. But I didn't remember anyone else in the room. I don't even remember who delivered him. Like, I don't remember the surgeon. I remember the anaesthetist, and I remember my midwife, but I don't remember anyone else in the room. So when they said that, I was like, okay. And then we got moved to a different room as we waited for a NICU, but of course, at that point, I did what all people should avoid doing. And I Dr. Googled, avoid it. It's awful. It doesn't help. It just makes anxiety so much worse. I mean, once you're in the hospital, if you're worried about something and you need to know if you should go to the hospital, in my opinion, I find it is more helpful in those situations, especially if you use the reliable websites. But when you're in the hospital, just wait for them to tell you what's wrong, because it did not help.
Yeah.
I was Googling thinking, okay, so in my head, this is what goes through my head. I'm thinking, okay, so she said she saw my delivery, so she knows what went on. And then I went, and we had a vacuum delivery. And I'm pretty sure she mentioned something to do with that. So we had a vacuum delivery. I think at that point I thought it was a forceps delivery, but we had the delivery, then we had the C-section. And then I went and she saw it. So I'm thinking seizures and infant. And so I start scrolling through, causes of subtle seizures in infants. Again, not a good idea. And I see a condition that can be caused by forceps or vacuum in deliveries that would cause subtle seizures. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I think it was hydrocephalus. I'm thinking I was absolutely a mess. I was like, I've caused this. I was like, I consented to the forceps. And then they've given my baby hydrocephalus. Okay, he doesn't have hydrocephalus, and he didn't have hydrocephalus. And it was all just a huge thing I could have avoided by not Googling. But I just went into a spiral, and I was like crying, thinking I've accepted something during his birth that's given him seizures. That it was, and if it had been that's like a lifelong thing. It doesn't go away, and it's not like you can have surgery for it, but it's still there. So I was freaking out a bit. I just shouldn't have Googled it, because I've never even heard of that condition until I'd Googled it. And he did have a funny shaped head, and he had a giant head. Like his head was 38 centimeters or something, which is very big for a baby.
Yeah, it is.
So then, of course, we went to the NICU eventually. So we got Monash Clayton, which was really good because it's so close to our home. I mean, half an hour, close enough. So we went to Clayton in the NICU. He had an EEG over 24 hours, and then he had to have a lumbar puncture, an MRI, a formal EEG, which is quicker, but they have to take him to imaging, blood tests. They started him in Casey before he even went to the NICU. They started him on anti-seizure medication. They started him on antibiotics and antivirals. So they're thinking a few things that at this point, apparently we figured out later that they were thinking it could have been an infection and it could have been a virus. So they were thinking maybe like HSV, so the herpes simplex virus, or they're thinking encephalitis, meningitis, or an infection. They're not too sure, but they're what they're thinking. So they're not thinking hydrocephalus. He had a bit of he had abnormal results in his blood test, in his MRI, and in his EEG, but not too abnormal. So in the end, they were still comparing. At that point, they'd figured out encephalitis, meningitis, or HSV. But I don't have I haven't had herpes at all. So they're thinking, but that at that point, where's it come from? Because at least if I'd had it, they could have gone, okay, and he could have got it from me. But I had never had it that I know of. I've never had symptoms of it. But I think 70% of the population will have it, but just don't have symptoms. So I've never had symptoms, which is when it's most contagious. So then they're thinking, maybe not herpes complex virus, but we never get a fully official diagnosis. And to this day, we don't know exactly what it was.
Oh, wow.
We know it was encephalitis or meningitis of the viral variety, but because they had treated it so quickly, it didn't come up on the cultures or the blood tests or the lumbar puncture what it was, but they have ruled it down to encephalitis or meningitis of the viral variety. So then at that point, that is stressful. He was in hospital for 2 weeks, and that isn't the most of time someone can be in hospital. I know that some can be in for longer, but I think that walking back and forth from the car to the hospital and all that was not great after a cesarean. I ended up getting a bit of a limp too, just as my muscles went back into place, and as my hips and pelvis went back into place. So I was struggling to walk, and it was painful. Not a fun time recovering early days, because that was the first 2.5 weeks. But he went really well. He didn't have any more seizures. At this point, he's still on his anti-seizure medication, but he's had an MRI and an EEG since, and they're all come back clear. We're just waiting on a blood test, and then if that's clear, we can take him off his meds. So that's looking good from that point of view. From the point of view of feeding, because obviously he went on to formula. He was on formula in the hospital, as well as they asked if I wanted to see a lactation consultant, and I said, sure. This was the day we went into the hospital. and the lactation consultant said you should be pumping, try and latch him when you can, but focus on pumping. And I was like, okay, but I just didn't really want to do it. And I was stressed out, and my nipples were cracked and bleeding, and I was tired, and I just did not really want to pump. So I tried to say I don't want to pump, and she didn't accept that. So she said, don't make any decisions while you're stressed out, because you might not be able to change those decisions later. So she said, just keep going now. You can change your mind later. If you want to stop, you can stop later. She said, try not to do it while you're really stressed out. And at the time, I just was like, don't like you very much. And she said that. She said, you will hate me right now, but eventually you will love me. And I was like, I don't know about that one. I don't think so, but okay, we'll check it out. So I kept pumping, and even by the next day, I was like so glad that I had taken her advice, because I got my first like mill of milk and from pumping, and I was so stoked. And I kept pumping, kind of was very lazy with my pumping, because I just didn't want to wake up in the middle of the night. I just didn't want to do that. I was like, I don't really want to.
Awful.
So I would pump when I was at the hospital a couple times a day, and then I would pump before bed. So maybe 2 or 3 times I would pump a day. But I had a good supply. Once my supply did come in, it was really a lot of milk. Like I was sometimes pumping like 300 ml in 10 minutes. Like a lot of milk. I thought I had a supply issue, and I did not have a supply issue. I think it was just delayed. My milk came in delayed, maybe from the cesarean. Not too sure. And I think with that combined with whatever virus Sully was fighting, he was not strong enough to put in the effort to learn. So then at that point, it was all like, okay, I was pumping. He was mixed fed, which was great. Bit stressful, but at least my husband could help out. He gave him a few bottles, and we were able to get through that period of time. And then eventually got to come home from hospital. He was only in there for 2 weeks and 2 days. Then we came home, kept on the formula and the mixed feeding. I would pump, again, really lazy, because I just didn't have the time to pump and feed him formula and do all the newborn stuff and sleep. So I was really lazy with my pumping. So then I was coping really well in the early days, I think, mentally. Like I didn't have a lot of anxiety. I mean, apart from the normal anxieties of checking if he was breathing, which I say it's normal because a lot of people do it. I don't know how normal that is. Maybe we all have a sense of anxiety about that, but it was nothing extreme, nothing I couldn't cope with. And nothing that didn't ease as he came home. I didn't feel the need to get him a sock or anything to check his vitals. So I don't think it was too extreme. I just wanted to make sure he was safe. Mentally, I think I was fine up until 4 or 5 months postpartum. That's when I started to kind of feel the bits of rage. And that's when shortly after that I was able to go off coffee. But yeah, pretty much straight away I was happy to, I was going out with people, seeing all my friends. They were really helpful. So I just was happy to do I was pretty easygoing. And even when we had the first time parents group, and at the time we had a litter of puppies. So we had 5 puppies, 2 dogs and a baby. Wow. We had the puppies. The puppies were born when he was less than a month old. So we had a lot going on, and I went into this first time parents group and telling them all about it, telling them about his experience in the NICU and how we have puppies. And I was like, yeah, but, we're just taking every day as it comes. And the person facilitating it was like, how are you so laid back? Like, because if I stress out too much, I'm just going to break down. Like, if I think about anything too much, it just is not going to help me at all. Like, I don't think reflecting on worrying about what's going to happen, or worrying about what has happened, or worrying about anything other than what we're doing on those days was going to help at all. It wasn't going to help. So I was like, so I just don't think about it. So I just take every day as it comes. And if the house is a mess, I just deal with it. I just don't look. I just close my eyes. I think she was impressed with how much I could just not worry. So from that, I was going really well in the early days, I think. Yeah, I was just able to go, you know what, sometimes things aren't going to get done during the day. I was able to condition my husband to expect not a lot to be done each day. A few times, he would kick up a stink, and he'd be like, you could have done more today. And I'd be like, okay, I mean, I could have done more today. You're right. But I didn't, because I would have stressed out if I'd tried to do more today. Yeah. And so on days he was home, I would ask him, I'd turn it back to him. And I'd say, hey, can you go to the shops and take Sully with you? And he would say, I can't take Sully to the shops. I won't be able to do the shopping. And I went, okay, that's fine. So I'll go to the shops. you stay home. You stay home, do the dishes, you have Sully, and I'll go to the shops. He's like, I can't do the dishes if I'm at home with Sully. And I think that at those points, anytime I would do this to him, he would realize what I was doing, because he'd realize that if he couldn't be expected to do it, he couldn't expect me to do it. Although on some days, like, I'd be fine. Like, I find it really easy to go out to the shops with Sully. Like, I don't find that to be a problem at all. But it was just more of a tactic I would use on the days that I didn't do anything. But on the days I just focused on Sully, or days that we just napped together, I at least had that tactic up my sleeve, and it really worked very well. Glad I thought of that.
That is a really good tactic,
then we
actually.
saw, just turn it back. I know it wouldn't work on everyone. But, like, with my husband, on the days he's not working, we very much do 50-50. I say, when you're working, I'm working. Sully's my job. But when you're at home, you can do, I mean, it's pretty much 50-50, because I do more of the feeding and putting to bed, but he does make up a bit. In the morning, after I've fed Sully all night, he'll wake up and get up with Sully. So that I can sleep in for a bit, because he got a full night's sleep. Nice. So, like, it's very 50-50. So on the days that he would say, you know, why haven't you done more? I would say those things to him, and he'd be like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah. And it was just a very good. Anyone listening, you can steal my technique, because it's very effective. And
I mean, the other thing that's important to mention too is obviously the dads have a really important role in postpartum, and you know, they haven't given birth, and you had on top of it a C-section, which means your recovery was potentially, you know, more painful. There was just, you know, it maybe took a bit longer for you to feel like you were back to, I guess, a normal self, or, you know, a new version of yourself. And that's sometimes something that dads forget, that, you know, you've just given birth, you've just had major surgery. Sully's been in the NICU for 2.5 weeks, really. You know, there has been this stress. You know, sometimes, you can't do the dishes because, you know what, I just don't feel like it today. I need to sleep. And that's how it is, you know. But that's a good technique still. That's a good one. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And he's very understanding of it all. But I think that technique just drives it home on the days that he does kind of go, could you have done more? And I said, yes, but I just didn't feel like it today. Yeah. Maybe the last main factor in my recovery, I suppose, postpartum more situation, would have been around a month and a half postpartum, and we saw, must have been maybe the 6-week checkup with the maternal child health nurse. We saw them, and they asked us about feeding and pumping and everything like that. I said, you know, we're doing mixed feeding with most, like, he connects, like, he latches sometimes, otherwise it's just mixed fed, bottle, formula, whatever, and then pumping when I can. So at that point she said, okay, like, there's a great resource, the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and they do like drop-ins where you can drop in and see someone who's trained, like an educator or like a counsellor or whatever. And they said, there was actually one that day, and she said, do you want me to book you in? And I said, yeah, sure, you know, I'll go, just see what they suggest. So we went to that day, and they said, because I said what I was doing is when we were heating up his bottles, I would offer him to latch, just to kind of appease him until the milk was ready, because when he wanted it, he wanted it. So then we'd get the milk on, but then I'd offer him to latch. And she just said, try feeding for longer periods of time, because he might be happy to do more breastfeeding. So eventually we tried offering the breast more often and offering him formula only, like after a good latch. And we did it for more feeds each day instead of just offering him, you know, to latch 2 or 3 times. We'd offer him more. It worked pretty well. We managed to have his last bottle of formula about 2 days before he turned 2 months. And now he's been just like, he hasn't had formula in 7 months. So he's been breastfed for 7 months.
Wow.
With no
that's
formula.
Amazing.
And obviously now he's eating solids. So, but yeah.
You've done so well. It is a really hard, I want to say, cycle to break, if I can say it that way, when you start mixed feeding, and it is really difficult. I'm not saying it to say, oh, well, you know, once you're on it, that's how it's going to be. It is really hard to go back to exclusively breastfeeding, but with the help of a lactation consultant or lactation counselor like the ABA, you can do it if that's something you want to do. Obviously, maybe some parents are happy to mix feed because the dad can be involved, the grandparents can be involved, whoever's looking after the baby. Good on you. You just stayed so headstrong through this whole postpartum, which just, it wasn't smooth sailing at all for you for the start, and you just stayed really focused on, obviously, on Sully and on his breastfeeding journey, and just very determined, and you knew what you wanted, and you did so well. I'm in awe of you, because it's a really hard journey you've been on, and you just, as you said, you just not cruised through it, but you did the things that didn't stress you out, so that you didn't feel overwhelmed, and you could mentally feel okay. That is amazing. The amount of things you juggled. Now I'm so happy that Sully is a very healthy 9-month-old, giving you grief, crawling all over the house, and he's got no consequences from the seizures. That is amazing. Yeah. Wow. Good on you.
Yeah,
You've done so well.
It was very lucky, and I feel like a bit of intuition. I don't know. Maybe my mum was there and she said, I've had 3 babies, which, I mean, 3 is more than me, but it's not a lot. But she picked up that he was doing something that none of her babies did. She said he's very starey. He just doesn't want to eat. She said he's falling asleep. She said it's just not normal. And so I think I call it some mum tuition, but also some grandmother tuition that got him into the hospital. Usually, when you have a virus like that, you wouldn't necessarily pick up on anything until they're really sick.
Yeah.
And we just picked up on it so early. That would have been like the first. To me, I think that he got the sickness after he was born. I doubt he was in my womb with a virus. So to me, even if he had got it the second he was born, usually with meningitis and encephalitis, their symptoms are onset at about 3 days after they've got it.
That's right.
See, that was his first symptoms. And we picked up on it so quick that he didn't get any lasting damage, that we haven't seen any anyway. And he had to see a few specialists the whole way through. They wanted him to get more hearing check, which he passed great. They had him have a few other ones. And then we had to see someone to make sure his movement was fine after he was born. They were pretty impressed. They said I was capable. So they gave me a little task, and they gave me a number and said, we're not going to book you for another appointment because you seem pretty capable to follow our instructions. They said, stop holding his head up. He was 12 weeks or so. They said, he should be holding his own head by now. Just stop holding it for him. They said, and he, if he hasn't been holding it himself by 4 months.
That's impressive.
Call us.
As you said, it could have been a lot worse. And, mum tuition is a thing. We do have intuitions where you just can't explain it, but you go, something's not right. And it is important to listen to that. And in your case, it was probably your intuition mixed with your mom's intuition, who's also a mom, obviously.
Yeah. And I think it shows it's so important to have support.
Yeah, exactly. And if you feel like something's not right, then act on it. And, if it means going to the hospital or going to see the GP and everything's fine, then everything's fine. And that's fine. You didn't waste anyone's time, It's like if you call an ambulance because you're really worried and you end up, being checked up and you're fine, then at least you're fine. But, it's important to follow that intuition, because sometimes, just like in your case, that probably made a huge difference in Sully's life, that you just went, okay, let's go to hospital. Even though he's 3 days old, he doesn't have an immune system. And obviously he's going to go in a place with, lots of sickness and diseases, but he needs to be seen by someone. And that was a saving grace. That is amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I reckon the early treatment, because they got the seizure medications and the viral medication and the antibiotics, they just pumped him fully immediately as soon as they were suspicious. They got it all.
Yeah.
And I think that it worked so well that by the time they even did any tests, it wasn't showing exactly what was wrong. But they did also say that there's so many viruses that honestly they don't have tests that can pick up all the viruses there are in the world.
Yeah.
So it could have been a virus that they just don't have a test for. But we just got it so early that it just started working straight away. He didn't have any seizures once he was on the medication. Good. He was the biggest baby in the hospital, and everyone liked seeing him because he didn't seem sick. Like, he didn't look sick.
Yeah.
He didn't act sick. He was just there for treatment. He was huge. They said he looks like he's eaten 3 of the babies because he's 4.5 kilos and they're all 1.5 kilos because, it's Monash. It's a level 6 NICU. Yep. They're all tiny. You could be in there a kilo and a half. He's 3 times this size. He was just massive. But then he recovered really well. And, we just had to see those people, and they just said, stop holding his head for him because he's relying on you. Mm-hmm. Did that. Within a few weeks, he was holding his own head. And they just wanted to monitor that he was doing all his milestones just in case there was permanent damage because obviously it was in his brain. But then, he started crawling and sitting and pulling himself up either on time or a bit early. He didn't speak super early. His first word at 9 months is good. It's definitely within range and it's not late. They said they want one word by one. No, not at all. So he was definitely in that. But he was starts talking, he babbles all the time. And then he's moving fine. I think that definitely helped because we weren't too stressed about how he was going. Once he left the hospital, we weren't worried about his health. And I didn't let it turn me into someone who stayed at home. I don't like staying at home for too long. I like to go out. Yeah. And I didn't want to worry too much about him and go, no, I have to have him at home in case he gets another infection. I just didn't let it worry me too much, which I think helps because I've worked in pediatrics and I've worked in a NICU. Mm-hmm. I've worked in a special care nursery out in Traralgon. And so I didn't let worry me too much because I know that I guess if he gets sick, we'll just deal with it again. Yeah. We just got to take each day as it comes, and I can't stay in the house because I'll go crazy. Yeah. So we don't worry too much about sickness. We just go out. He's got his vaccines, and especially after his 6 weeks vaccines. We go out, we'll sit at a cafe or I'll let him crawl around. At the start, I was worried about washing his dummy, and now I just, if he wants to drag it on the ground, it's his prerogative. He can do what he wants. Yeah. But I just let him. Right. We have dogs, and we have 2 dogs, and our house isn't spotless because the dogs just don't even allow that. He plays with the dogs. He pats the dogs. Pretty sure he's probably tried to eat them. You know what? We're just not. He had COVID. We think we didn't actually put a swab up his nose, but we think he's just had COVID. But he was fine. He honestly he would cough, which was really sad to hear. But he would be having a cough or a sniffly nose, but then he'd be laughing and smiling and playing. And did not stop his energy. He didn't sleep more. He just was the exact same, just with a cough and a runny nose. So just kind of not let it worry us too much. But we do think, I do think for future children, I'll probably want to see a professional, a different one, just to talk through the anxiety from the loss perspective and from the sickness afterwards perspective. Yeah. And I'll probably want to do more breastfeeding education because even though I've breastfed for 7 months, I didn't breastfeed for the first 2 months, which I feel like those would be some of the hardest months to breastfeed. And I feel like I bypassed them. I just didn't. Just started breastfeeding at 2 months. I pumped, but I didn't breastfeed. And I feel like those would have definitely been the hardest because he would have breastfed more often. I feel like I really got lucky there. Not lucky, obviously. Him being in the hospital wasn't lucky. But being able to restart at 2 months, I felt really lucky there. Definitely want more education because, I feel like I need the preparation to breastfeed immediately.
No, and that's a really good plan because it is important to get that education, especially on breastfeeding, and get it while you're pregnant, even though it seems like, well, I haven't got the baby, my breasts are not ready yet, but it's good to know and to be able to recognize things like, tongue ties, things like maybe signs of low supply, and just have the knowledge, because then you can seek help early so that your breastfeeding journey can be smoother sailing, right? And or you can recognize problems, or you can troubleshoot them and go, oh, okay, I think this is happening. I need to do this to help me, So I think it's really important, and it's something that's forgotten about, but it is starting to be spoken about a bit more. So therefore mums go, oh, maybe I should do that. And even if you're not planning to breastfeed, or you're not sure, maybe you're on the fence, get the education and then see what you want to do. The more knowledge you have, the more comfortable you will be. And therefore, with the newborn stress, at least having the confidence to go, well, I've done this course, or I've gotten this person's number, or I've done this. That sometimes can be the difference between, attempting to breastfeed and not attempting to breastfeed at all sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like personally for me, I don't spend a lot of money to breastfeed. I was given a pump, which was very great. So I didn't have to buy a pump. I was given a lot of bottles and stuff like that. And from the NICU, they actually let us take the bottles home. So we got a lot of bottles there. They have the bottles, so they let us take some new ones, and they let us take the ones that we'd used from home already. So I only just recently replaced all these bottles because I do pump sometimes. But I didn't spend a lot of money on breastfeeding. So if I had spent the money on the education while I was pregnant, if it had been successful for those 2 months that I had put him on formula, it probably would have been equivalent. Like, I would have spent the amount of money that I would have spent on a lactation consultant on formula for those 2 months, I reckon. When I am, like, next time, I'll want to spend that money then, so that hopefully it increases my chance of breastfeeding the whole time next time. And that money I'll probably save, because if I don't need formula, then I'm not buying formula. I'm doing breastfeeding pretty cheap. I know some people can't do it as cheap if they have to miss work or anything, but I haven't had to do anything like that. I feel like even from a financial point of view, because a lot of people may struggle to pay for a lactation consultant, success in breastfeeding may have actually saved me the money on formula anyway. So that's my perspective for next time, is that I'll just spend the money on the lactation consultant and hope that it means I don't spend the money on formula.
That's a very good
it's
plan.
Definitely
You've got.
useful.
I
My
like
son
it.
had really bad. I'd prefer to know what to expect better next time. And I guess it's hard because I don't know what to expect, because I didn't actually breastfeed for the 2 months of the start. So I do just definitely need, I know more what to expect now, because I've done a lot of education after all the birth. So when Sully was 4 months postpartum, I decided I wanted to do something to help mums during the birth postpartum period, and I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do, but then I decided I wanted to help people, and I started studying to be a doula, and in that I've learnt a lot more about birth and postpartum and breastfeeding and all of that. So I definitely feel like I will be more prepared next time. But one thing I say is, I'll be having a doula next time, and I'll be having a lactation consultant, which sometimes people are surprised. They're like, oh, but you're a doula and you're going to have a doula. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have a doula. I already know which one I'm going to reach out to. I have plans.
Love your plans, man.
Yes. I even have a backup.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
good. That's good.
I definitely will be investing more into my labour next time, I think, because I didn't know this time, but now I know next time, just to help. And maybe I'll hopefully get a doula that can do a bit of the birth debrief trauma training, just to help me get past any fear, especially as I get closer to my due date, because I can see that coming up again. But I will definitely be investing more into my next experience. But in saying that, when I do look back, although it was very overwhelming, stressful time, there are a lot of good things. I had a lot of good staff, like midwives, good midwives, and I had a really great anaesthetist. I put in something saying, you were fantastic.
Oh, nice.
So I did have a good experience overall. It could have been better.
Nice. Good.
And a lot of that would have been about education and being informed. But it was pretty good. And I think it was I was just pretty easygoing into it, which helped me and also didn't help me. It helped because when things went not according to how I would have preferred, I was pretty happy with however it turned out. But then at the same time, if I'd prepared more and wasn't as easygoing, it might have been a different story. But it's pretty good, especially after I had my epidural in my situation. Made me a lot happier. I was No, I just needed to have prepared more.
That's
so for my circumstances, I was definitely satisfied. I think it definitely took a lot of thoughts though, because afterwards a few months afterwards, I had to think about it and go, oh, you know what? I don't know if I even consented to that vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Still don't know to this day, but and I put a lot of thought into it, and I was like, you know what? And all the vaginal exams, I was like, could they have introduced bacteria in that caused a virus for my son?
Yeah.
I don't know any of this, and it was causing me a lot of like frustration and stress, and I was thinking about it too much, going, was it the vaginal exams? You know, was it this? Was it, what was it? And I was frustrated. I was like, I didn't even consent to that vacuum. I don't know for sure. In the end, I've actually just gone, you know what, when I look back and I think about my birthing experience, my cesarean was actually good. My epidural worked perfectly. Good. So when I look on each factor, I go, you know what, the induction wasn't fantastic. But when that induction came really, like the epidural came really quick, it worked fantastically. I had a great experience once I had it. I was able to relax. I was able to have a chat. It was pretty fairly quick procedure. And then when I got to my cesarean, it was relaxed. It was chill. The anaesthetist was fantastic. Good. I was feeling really tired. I didn't know that like you start shaking sometimes during a cesarean. I start shaking and I felt really tired. And I was like, can I sleep? And he was like, absolutely, you can sleep. So he let me have a nap. The midwife helped me try and latch Sully immediately in recovery. They showed me him immediately when he was born, but I was so tired. I did not care. I was like, I don't want to see him. I need to sleep. And once I got to recovery, then I really cared. And then they like full on passed him to me, and I did the first latch and everything. They were great. You know, I didn't want to, like, I did want to see him, but I was just like so tired that I had a nap. And Lindsay got to have him. So my husband got to have him the whole time in the recovery while they were waiting for me. That was good. So when I reflect on it, I try to actually, I've already like thought of and tried to process a lot of the labor. And then I try and just not think too much about anything that doesn't bring me happiness. I actually walked out of it fine. Sully walked out of it fine. Good. We were happy and healthy.
That's it.
Although,
and that's,
you know, I'll do it. I'll hopefully do it differently next time.
Maybe. But, who knows? Who knows? Birth is just
this one was great.
So unpredictable. And it's good to reflect and to say, you know, this is my experience, and to have a positive outlook and to acknowledge the things that went well is a really important thing to do, and that's what you're doing. So yeah, good on you. Good, amazing. You know, I hope, you know, your next pregnancy and your next birth is everything you want it to be, and that it goes as smoothly as it can. You know, that is all I can wish for you.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, as I know from the last one, I'm pretty easygoing about it.
Yeah, exactly. You'll find your feet. Yeah, no, that's right. I'm so glad I got to record your story. It's such a good one. Thank you so much for everything you've shared, and especially postpartum rage, because this is something that is not spoken about, and it is so good that you are doing it. It is essential that we start talking about it, and that's what you're doing. So thank you.
No, definitely. Thanks for having me. It was good to chat.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.